Welcome to The Speakeasy, a podcast of the local church. The Speakeasy is a place for unfiltered conversations on faith and justice. At each gathering, we invite a special guest to share their story in conversation around a particular topic or issue related to faith and justice. We hope The Speakeasy inspires empathy, fosters common ground, and cultivates deeper connections in our community and beyond. To learn more about the local church, visit growlocal.church or just come see us one Sunday morning. Here's the pastor of the local church, Brent Levy.
Well, good evening, friends. So glad that you're here tonight. Welcome to the Speakeasy. This is a forum of the local church, which is a faith community here in Chatham County. And what we do at these events are invite revered special guests like Susannah to come and to share about their experience, but in particular at the intersection of faith and a particular justice issue. We we restarted these last month here with Mike Wiley and a bit of a focus on racial justice. Tonight we welcome Susannah Tuttle, a friend of mine and a friend of the local church and a friend of the plant and a friend of everybody, it seems, to come and share about the intersections of faith and in particular climate justice tonight. And so I'm so excited that you're here, Susannah. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's such an honor to be here. What a gorgeous day, beautiful place. This is so inspiring.
I love this place so much. We're so grateful to the plant for their.
Glad you all are here.
Yeah. I'm going to read your bio. The Reverend Susannah Tuttle is the director, just fact check me if any of this is incorrect, okay? Is the director of the Eco-Justice Connection and Interfaith Power and Light, North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, North Carolina Council of Churches initiatives addressing environmental and climate justice issues as a moral imperative. Susannah received a Master of Divinity degree with an emphasis on ecological ethics from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. A founding member of the Southeast Faith Leaders Network and is an active member of the U.S. Climate Action Network. You currently serve on the executive board of the Southeast Climate and Energy Network and serves as an international community outreach coordinator for the U.S. Climate Fair Share Collaborative. Ooh. You live on a gravel road in Orange County with your husband, who's a builder, gardener, and musician, and your beloved dog. And so that's what the internet says you are, that's Susannah.
Right. I wrote that.
You got to pick. What was it? But who is Susannah Tuttle to Susannah
that's
Tuttle?
That's a lot of work, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to make it a little more personal.
Yeah, with the dog.
What does she do when she's not doing all these things? And I do like to be at home in Orange County. So it's good to be here. I love music. We have a common obsession that I think we don't get to spend a lot of time together. I actually haven't seen you in a couple of years.
Yeah, a couple of years.
Physically. But spiritually, we're constantly connected.
Deep connections with U2, the band.
That's right.
U2.
Not only me, but you too.
I see what you did there. That's great. So outside of this, and maybe we can't extract those things, but who is Susannah Tuttle?
Gosh.
Outside of
Reverend Brent.
This bio.
This is why you didn't send questions
just
beforehand.
A nice softball. Yeah.
For those of you that know me, both in workspaces and outside of workspaces, I like to. I often introduce myself as Aquarian Enneagram 7. I don't know if that means anything to folks or not, but to have those be like the constellation of who I am in this physical form is pretty fun. I'm enthusiastic about what I do. The Enneagram 7, of course, is known as the enthusiast, and I think
which means like a lot of interest, just kind of
a lot of interest,
a lot of passions,
a lot of big ideas.
Yeah, sure.
Follow through is a bit challenging. Which is why I work in community, because there are folks that really want to implement big ideas, and I have a lot of big ideas that I need people to implement. So that's the sort of celestial makeup of who I am, and then I do that all in everywhere because I just love life. I love this existence. I think my calling to seminary was, and through the study of ecological ethics, has always been like, what is the nature, point, and purpose of my existence? And then how does that connect with everyone else's nature, point, and purpose of existence? And then how do we root that in love and kindness and justice so that we can create the world that we wish to see? And you know, as someone who was born in 1972, I grew into a world that actually just hasn't been the world that I want to be in. And so getting to practice different ways, and certainly music and dance, celebration, friends, food, family, all of that.
A lot of embodiment,
Yeah.
it sounds like,
Yeah.
and a
Experiential.
creatureliness.
I like this physical experience. I know it won't last forever, and so I'm trying to get as much out of it as I possibly can.
Is that part of where this passion began for the climate, for justice, for
Absolutely.
Say more about that. Yeah, where did that passion come from?
Well, it's great. I always thought that I would do theater. I loved theater growing up, and I loved going into storytelling and getting to experience different emotions and through character development. I always thought I would write and direct for some reason as a high school student. Political theater, like that I would make a point with the drama and the storytelling that would change people and make people think. And I went to Bennington College for 1 year, and it turned out not to be a place for me. Probably because my classmates at the time were Peter, oh my gosh, what's this? It was Justin Thoreau and Peter Dinklage were at Bennington with me.
They were your classmates?
So if you know who those people are, I was like, I do not have these skills. And so I left Bennington after 1 year in Vermont and ended up in San Francisco. And that's where I really started to explore all sorts of creativity and just being in that space, having grown up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so getting these like coastal kind of educations in a way real quick, and then ending up in the redwood forest in Santa Cruz Mountains.
I remember that.
Yes, we talked about that the first time. And just being amongst those trees, I think when we met last time, I even talked about supporting Julia Butterfly Hill. I'm doing a lot of name dropping right now, but for those of you that know, Julia Butterfly went up and lived in a tree for 3.5 years to protect major old growth redwood forests. And that required a lot of groundwork, team building, to make that successful. And that's when I really began to be interested in sort of the mycelium of community engagement and organizing, and ended up going to seminary and loved it. Came to North Carolina in the middle of that and found what Thomas Berry would refer to as the bioregion of my heart. I really feel connected to this area of the country, and I had not lived here before. So.
What is it about this area?
I think it's the people, the culture, the community. You heard in my bio, I do a lot specifically in the Southeast. So even though my employment is in North Carolina, my network is much vaster than that state boundary, the Carolinas in particular. And then the 10-state, now including Puerto Rico, reach that we have through the Southeast Climate and Energy Network is just so special. And I mean, every part of the country is different, and I'm glad and blessed to have lived so many different places, but there's just nothing like the Southeastern United States.
How did you end up with North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light?
So IPL, which is the acronym, was started in San Francisco, actually, when I was in seminary. I started in 1998, and Reverend Sally Bingham launched IPL in 2000, formerly Episcopal Power and Light, as she was Episcopalian and is a Reverend Canon in the Episcopal Church. But very quickly we recognized that this needed to be an interfaith, multi-faith movement. And it was pretty early. People in churches and religious spaces were not talking about climate change, and so there was a real push to have that conversation from a place of faith, because I've said this in grant applications, I've said it in public, I'll say it again now. I truly believe it is a failure of people of faith that we are in this climate crisis. And so we have to have those conversations in those sanctuaries so that we can actually talk to ourselves about where we're failing.
Sure. Why do you think that failure, like where do you think that failure originated?
Well, now we talk about, global climate change is actually a health issue, right? It's a global health crisis for all species and particularly for human beings. And so the fact that it's gotten to this scale and that folks have complacently sort of known or heard about it, always a little bit of a disconnect with the science, and that's a lot of what Interfaith Power and Light tries to do is connect the dots.
Become a bridge, yeah.
Translate the science
Sure.
so that it's real for people in their hearts and minds, and particularly decision makers. But also, it's just, we know a lot more than we think we do, especially progressive people of faith. And part of the problem is that what we're up against is inhibiting pathways to actually change our culture and lifestyles in the ways that we could address the problem at scale.
So like what are we up against in your estimation?
So at this point, and since I've seen you, so a lot has happened.
Yeah, so, and just, we had a conversation like this probably 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah,
at a different
pre-pandemic.
venue, pre-pandemic, and so that was one of my questions that I wanted to ask is it's been a couple years and things have obviously gotten so much better. And the definition of insanity, right, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So here we are, but what's different now than a couple years ago?
So globally, a lot obviously has shifted. I mean, I don't think we could have ever imagined what it would be like to live through a pandemic. I know, and we talk a lot about this in faith communities, that we are still, the impacts are just still revealing themselves, and it's never going away. And so just how we interact in communities with a public health lens has totally transformed itself. So I'm hopeful that some cultural shifts are being made, that, we, again, in communities of faith and conscience, like developing that culture of care and really taking care of each other and ourselves in that I tend, as I said in the beginning, my personality is to look at things through the lens of hope. So I feel really positive that some big transitions are taking place as a result of the horrors that people have experienced through that time and what continues to unfold. Simultaneously, the global climate atmospheric shift that has taken place has gotten to a point that it is so severe, and we can't go back and undo time. The things that we didn't do, we can't redo. So that shift is really different. And I will say, when we talked before, I was predominantly, there's sort of 3 areas of climate change action, work, policy making that takes place in the areas of mitigation, which is actually reducing the carbon emissions that we emit. And then there's adaptation, which is, okay, this is a different place than it was before. How are we going to grow things differently? How are we going to think about water differently? So that's adaptation. And then there's
so some places crops are no longer viable, and so
I would say the whole planet has moved into an adaptation phase.
Sure.
Particularly just around temperature, access to things. And the pandemic helped us adapt in a way that we didn't necessarily know we would.
Sort of practiced adaptation.
Sure. Yeah, in a kind of, which brings us to resiliency, which is probably the hottest buzzword. So maybe
pun intended. 10,
20 years, sustainability was all the rage, and simultaneously there was always that tension that people said, what do we have the ability to sustain, and what is worth sustaining? That word was always very problematic. It's interesting that we're in a time frame now where we're talking about resiliency and jumping into climate justice issues. We're finding that the communities that are hit first and worst with climate impacts are not using that word in the way that the science community...
Resiliency?
Resiliency.
Like
if when I go and spend time in communities in the eastern part of the state, for example, and I ask them what resiliency means to them, they don't automatically go to the conversation around climate change. So part of what we're doing right now is to make sure that we're not, again, creating this like data-driven design, funding mechanism that doesn't actually address the needs of the communities, and let them be able to tell us what it is that is happening to them, and then how to resource them in what the ways that they need.
So is resiliency is the third of those three: mitigation, adaptation.
Those are kind of the three pillars of where folks working on climate are finding themselves. And then I feel like people of faith and conscience are able to hold all of that, because we know we have to be in the mitigation space. We personally and community, layers are already in the adaptation phase, and then resiliency becomes a sort of the most important conversation right now that we're having. What does that mean? What does that mean 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years from now? What do we have to do?
Sure. Well, let's go back to some of those systems that are standing in the way of, I would imagine, mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency in many ways. What would you name those as? Big and small? I mean, it's important to kind of get it out there, right?
And we're in a place where we can tell the truth.
Yeah,
here.
that's right.
When the Pope released the encyclical on the environment now over 10 years ago, it's hard to believe, he named it as capitalism and greed, and from whatever theological background you come from this idea that there are like bad ways of being and good ways of being, and I think the powers of what has happened in the neoliberal market capital-based system of our world, and with the United States being a primary driver in that, is really our biggest barrier. And then how governments have sort of gotten sucked up under that is what I have spent the last 5 years focusing on now. And it was actually in 2019 that I had the opportunity to be given a presentation. It was the first time I'd ever heard it, and I'd been working on this kind of stuff for decades. But it was on global equitable climate finance. And I'm not an economist. I mean, do you like to talk about money in your faith community?
All the time. Yeah, no, it's, no.
I would say money is the number one most difficult conversation to have at the community level, at any level. But what's particularly interesting is in progressive places of faith, it is the hardest conversation to have. And there is also...
It's just under here. It's under the...
Yeah. It's over there. And if we need it, we can access it, but we don't want to talk about it. And so I think back to, the youth movements on college campuses that really began the conversation around divestment from fossil fuel investments, and then what happened within faith communities. And it was about the same time that the encyclical on the environment came out. And major denominations made pledges to move their money out of it, for their pensions and for how they care for, in retirement, wherever their money is. Like you take the Episcopal Church, for example, they made major pledges that they would commit to getting money out of fossil fuels investments. And it's been really interesting because at the local church level, talking about the local church, how do you have that conversation? It's not sort of pulling the strings and unwinding where that money is and what it's invested in is what gets me up every day now. I am absolutely fascinated because, and I'll turn it back to you, but in 2019, I was at Climate Week in New York City with the United Nations General Assembly.
Is that like Fashion Week?
It is. Yeah. It's better. Yeah, better. And they do it every year in September as part of the United Nations General Assembly in New York at the UN headquarters there. And then we have like tons of side events. And there was a whole faith contingency there that was talking about global equitable climate finance and where the money was going to come from, because the governments are not putting up the money that's necessary for countries on the continent of Africa to actually transition into the kind of resiliency strategies that we need, and they can't adapt because it's just one thing after another. And so I learned in 2019 that approximately $57 trillion, that's trillion, has been pledged in the form of divestment dollars by denominations globally.
Wow.
So show me the money. Where's the money? Because that's what it's going to take. And you know who should pay for it? People of faith and conscience. And then we should make our governments pony up their fair share, and we should make corporations be accountable to pay their fair share. And so when you listen to perhaps the State of the Union address, you heard those words, fair share. People are using those two simple words that kids learn on the playground, right? And that's what it's going to take to scale the solutions to address the climate crisis at scale.
Sure.
And faith communities have a massive role to play in that, and that's like going to be my Sermon on the Mount.
So 57 trillion has been pledged.
I don't know where it is. I don't know who's calculating that. So in comparison, I have started attending the United Nations Committee of Parties, the UN climate negotiations. I was in Egypt 2 years ago. I was in Dubai this past year. It's going to be in Azerbaijan. This year I'm not going to go because they call this COP. It's the worst acronym ever, but COP 30 in 2025 is going to be in the Amazon in Brazil. And I'm going to be there. So that said, it's been really interesting to be in that United Nations space and learn back into the threes. It always is the Trinity, isn't it? So the threes of how the United Nations works in these spaces is that you have government, which is considered to be sort of the public society. Then you have private society, which is businesses. And then you have civil society, which is all of us. Every single person on the planet is a member of civil society. But this is a huge imbalance of power in relationship to decision making right now. And so civil society globally is doing a huge reorg, thinking very differently. You talked about the definition of insanity before. We're coming up, this will be COP 29, COP 30 in Brazil in 2025. And civil society has basically had no voice in these negotiating spaces.
Why is that? Power,
money. And so then that's where, let's go back.
Just a vicious cycle,
money?
right? Yeah, sure.
So my big campaign that I wanted to like sort of seed all of you in here as we sit in this beautiful sunny day at this beautiful at the plant here in Pittsburgh, North Carolina, is who wants to have a working group with me where we actually sit down and think about how we can map progressive affluence. Who are the progressive people in our society
Classic
that have
John Parker,
access to financial resources, and where is that money? Because we need to access it yesterday. And I think congregations and communities of faith
can be about that work.
Yeah. They can lead the work. They can access the work. I don't know where the 57 trillion is, but let's talk even at the local church level in this community. Where is the money in this community? Is it, at every church, when we talked about divestment and they said, well, we don't have an endowment. And I said, okay, all right, let's start with the easy one. Where is your bank account for your church? Where is the local church's bank account? Can you answer that?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's amazing. That's so good.
Do you want me to?
I mean, it's up to you.
Well, now I'm scared.
If you want to be transparent about it.
We're at First Horizon.
Okay.
Because we had a friend in contact there who could get that set up.
Yeah, and I don't know anything about that bank.
I know where it is.
Yeah. I know where it is. That's a great answer, because a lot of times the people I meet with are not the ministers of the church. It's lay leaders and green teams and things like that. And they actually can't answer that question offhand. And then I say, okay, but maybe on next Sunday, or when you're back in community, you could ask that question as the plate is being passed. Where is this money actually going to be deposited? Because I would love it if every congregation in North Carolina had at least one deposit. You don't have to have your whole entire asset map, financial assets in one place. Diversification is a good idea. But self-help credit union is a great place to have a deposit. I know the North Carolina Council of Churches has all of our money currently that we can move around at Latino Credit Union. And that's very intentional. And Latino Credit Union, some of you might know, actually came out of self-help. Self-help helped incubate Latino Credit Union. And there's other credit unions that we're trying to amplify so that the money stays in the community. And that is a great thing to talk about with people of faith. And then go home and look at your own portfolio. And so when my dad died a little less than 2 years ago, I had an inheritance, and I asked the person that had been managing his money where the money was. I didn't care as much. I mean, I was grateful about the number of dollars, but I wanted to know where every single dollar was. And they could not answer that question. And so Earth Equity, based in Asheville, amazing company. My friend Pete Kroll started it. They have a great team. He has a whole system where you can take wherever your money is right now, your entire portfolio, and he'll upload it into his modeling. Turned out most of my family's money was in tobacco.
Wow.
I didn't want it to be in tobacco anymore. So figuring out where I wanted it to be, I would love.
And you had that agency. You had that agency with.
Well, and then knowing. So how do we as faith communities resource communities, individuals, and this is the justice work that progressive people of affluence can do. Because when we think about climate justice and we think about environmental justice, we often immediately go to the suffering, right? And we think about the suffering. We need to learn about the suffering. We want to hear, we want to support, we want to do what we can. And then this is even, so on a global scale, the United States, our fair share is more than any other country on the planet to help the rest of the planet address this issue. So that's what we're working on right now, and we're launching a major U.S. Climate Fair Share campaign. I hope to get it all to everybody so you can get it.
Starts here now? Is that what you're saying?
Starts here right now.
Sure.
So take out your, give to the local church.
Yeah, sure.
We're gonna, for real.
So you were the one a couple of years ago who first used the phrase with me, environmental justice or climate justice, rather than climate change. And it strikes me that, and I think that was the first moment for me when I realized the intersectionality of climate change as it relates to poverty and socioeconomic justice, as well as racial justice and all of the things. I remember I was talking with somebody from our congregation a couple of years ago who, in the midst of all of the things, right? In the wake of George Floyd and the ensuing protests, among others, she asked her teenager, what do you care about most? Like, what really gets you angry? Like, what do we need to care about? And her teenage son said, it's the climate, because if we don't do anything about that, nothing else matters, right? And so I just, I wonder if you could say more about the intersectionality of climate justice. In particular, we were talking about recycling, earlier and beforehand, and just how that's not particularly helpful. We've been lied to, because in large part because so much of our plastic is shipped off, and countries don't know what to do with it, right? So I don't know. I'm rambling, but maybe you could say more.
That would be the ultimate conspiracy theory if recycling was a ploy to get people to consume more plastic. I mean, who knows, right?
Well, isn't it true that essentially the recycling movement was by the companies to put the burden of responsibility back on the consumer, and not their own. I mean,
it was definitely a market-based solution, and the reduce reuse was always there, but of course, the propagation of petroleum-based resources, again, the fossil fuel industry, of making all these plastics is something. And then, God, unfortunately, we had no concept of the chemicals and everything that was going to be a result of all of that. But yeah, I mean, and I was mentioning is like I spent a good part of my career trying to get congregations to recycle, and then they did, and now we're like, oh, well.
Yeah, JK.
And it's very interesting because a similar issue is happening right now in conversations globally about renewable energy and the solar industry. And so, I think for me, and I want to come back to your original question, but like the more global that I engage, the better I can understand how to act locally. And that's like that's a bumper sticker, right? But at the same time, like, I wasn't always in the years and years, and I'm very proud of the work that we've done to get solar on congregations in North Carolina. We have some of the most on congregational facilities of any place in the country, and a lot of it is because of the volunteer work that took place through Interfaith Power and Light, and having groups like North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, and just like a lot of really good movement around that. Now that I'm in the international space and learning about mining issues in other parts of the country, I mean, all of us have our cell phone, like all of these things are real conversations that we need to be having, and who's directly impacted at a justice level for what we would consider to be solutions to a problem that we are causing. So it's a cycle. This week was International Women's Day on Friday. I had the benefit of being a part of a women economic development organization, We Do, one of my favorite international organizations called We Do. I wrote a whole sermon about feminist principles for a Green New Deal, if anybody wants a copy of that. But so it was really interesting because they were talking about the rights of nature, and really led by indigenous wisdom. And the rights of nature is really, like, truly as a Bill of Rights for nature, is really taking off in other parts of the world. And actually here locally, as part of the work that they're leading to protect the water rights of the Haw River, 7 Directions of Service, you might be familiar. Love to have Dr. Crystal Cavalier, member of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation, indigenous-led movement building taking place right here locally. And I've traveled around. She was in Dubai with me, and she and her husband, Crazy Bear, are just amazing leaders. But she was on this international webinar on Friday talking about the rights of nature. And it was, quote, the smallest, simplest, like think globally, act locally, was, I am nature protecting itself. And when I was drawn to want to study creation care and recognize that I am part of creation, I'm not on creation, I'm of creation, that just hit me on Friday. I am nature protecting itself.
It's a powerful
everything I'm doing.
Perspective shift.
And so if we just wake up every day totally connected, and we're the ones that we're protecting ourselves and the people and places that we love, that's ministry. That's what we're called to do.
Sure.
So the justice piece has to be put forward first. You can talk about climate change, but one of the greatest EJ mentors that I have, environmental justice, we call him the Minister of Environmental Justice based in South Carolina, Reverend Leo Woodbury, has a whole conference every year that you might be interested in attending. It always happens in October in Florence, South Carolina, where he does incredible justice work. And it's called Creating a Climate for Change. So if we think about everything as climate, the political climate, the social climate, the educational climate that we're in, like all of the different things, we have to create a complete shift in all of those climate spaces. Then inherently, the environmental aspect will be, the ecosystem will shift.
Sure. One of the shifts, if we're talking about that I've seen over the last 5 years too, is since we met, is more of a fraying of the middle, a more polarized. It's no secret, no surprise, such that it's almost acceptable to believe things for which there is no evidence, to put it one way. And there are still folks who would deny climate change, or would see record global temperatures and major hurricanes and increase in wildfire, like whatever it might be, as isolated events unconnected to one another. For example, how do you engage that conversation? How do you reason with the unreasonable? In my estimation, right?
Well, your brain, I mean, this has really shifted, and talk about things that are different than they have been. I mean, I don't think I need to tell anybody in this space that, like, what does it mean to be artificially intelligent, right? And how we're addressing that right now is something that I think maybe people like me, I'm a little bit late to the game already. I'm really ahead on a lot of other things, but and maybe it's I'm not going to blame it on anything other than I haven't had time to learn how to use it in the way that I see a lot of people using AI right now. And yet I keep being told that that's going to be a huge part of the solution.
Sure. And the thing about that, though, that I think about a lot is nobody asked if I wanted it.
Right.
Just like our phones, just like, so much that is and has contributed to the climate crisis.
Yeah.
Is no one ever says, hey, you guys want this? Is this a good idea?
Yeah.
Right? It's just like, here you go. We have this new thing. And then everybody's like, oh, wow, that's good. Right? And so I think there's a connection there.
And so how do you, especially at the community level, decide the parameters of what you're trying to experience? Now, back to your point about where it's gotten frayed in the middle, is I think we are moving back into, like, before all of this, I mean, was telling my young nephews, we're at an age where, like, globalization was not a word, and then it was a word, right? And a lot of that happened, like, when we were in our 20s and the trade agreements were made. Again, I wasn't asking for all this, but all that was done under the auspice of commerce, right? And the market system. And we need to move stuff from here to here to here because we need it over here. And then the US is like, and we're going to have everything come here, and we're going to make some of it too, but it's very, very overwhelming. And so in many ways, with all the access to information that we have, you can't very well weed through what is true and what is not. And that's where storytelling and really listening to yourself, to your heart, to your gut, looking at what you're experiencing and making sure that you're speaking to that and from that, and kind of goes back again, from the local to the global as well, is that, like, where is humanity in this conversation? Where is civil society, as it were, if that's what we're being named by the UN? Like, who is making all of these decisions, and how do we actually have a voice if the very systems that are being designed, are like truly designed in order to keep us apart? Like, they don't want humanity to come together. Yeah,
because that's a threat to their power. Yeah. Sure.
And so
Paul would talk about powers and principalities, right?
So
and this is exactly what he's talking about.
This is like the dream, right? I'm sure there's movies and books and things, like, if we just stopped, then there wouldn't be, but at the same time, I'm going to be honest with you. I've spent so much time in the halls of Congress. The way in which our General Assembly and the politics of North Carolina go, we flip-flop. We're such an interesting state dynamically as far as, what might even be the outcomes of this election. The Council of Churches is putting together a Vote Our Values, whole entire book around all of the different issue areas, questions to ask yourself, questions to ask your community, and questions to ask candidates, so that you can get a sense about who's actually going to represent you. Because I think we're at a point right now where, like, I don't want that person, and I really don't want that person, but I want that person more than I want this person. But you don't actually know what their positions are on anything. And I think congregations have a huge role to play in that. The local church should hold a candidate forum for every single person that runs for an office in this county. That would be amazing. And at least if they didn't accept the invitation, they received the invitation.
Sure.
Because they know you care. And that's what I try to get congregations to do. You're having a blessing of the animals, you're having a seeding of the garden, whatever you're doing, invite decision makers. That doesn't mean they're going to come, but they're going to hear from you.
Sure.
And I have zero interest in talking to, this is why I went back to the wait, I can hang out with progressives. I can choose who my friends are. I can choose who I spend time with. I'm very lucky. I have thousands of friends on Facebook, and I don't have anybody on the opposition in my friend network. I'm not one of those people that wants to get into it. I have too many other things I need to get done. And so what's frustrating is that I try to mobilize those thousands of people of progressives, and they're not doing what I'm telling them to do.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what to say. I'm not the person to heal the middle at this point. And maybe that's a part of getting older.
Well, can you point us in any direction if it's not you?
I would say it is you. You are the minister of a community of people of faith and conscience, pushing that conversation as you do. I mean, that's why I look to the local church and what you do as a leader, as a true leader, and then sitting with the tension, and also figuring out how to. I don't have the answer to that. I really don't. The community needs to design it for itself, and I mean, I don't know. You have a lot going on in this community. I had not driven down 15501 in a long time.
It's a little different.
Very different.
A little different.
A lot is happening here very quickly. And so how your community decides to respond to that is up to you.
I mentioned, we'll take some Q&A here in a moment.
That was a little heavy.
You just put it back on me. Challenge accepted. But I mentioned before we went live about just how overwhelming it has felt for me. I read Naomi Klein's "This Changes Everything" in Divinity School, and Rob Nixon's "Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor." And I remember talking to my professor, Dr. Chuck Campbell, John knows, and I said, what do I do with this?
Right?
What am I supposed to do? I feel terrible. Where's the hope here? Slow violence, in particular, about the ways, the sinister ways that climate change affects very slowly and imperceptibly, such that once we realize its effects, it's too late because it's moving that slowly. And so I wonder. I still feel that way. When scientists are about to create a Category 6 hurricane, and wildfires in Texas are raging stronger than they would have apart from warming temperatures. And as I mentioned, every month it seems January was the hottest on record, February was the hottest on record. What can we do? And we talked about some of that, right, with the asset mapping and things of that nature. But there's got to be more.
These are the questions of our time. I mean,
you're the director of eco justice for the North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. What are you doing?
I think for me, it really is in listening, as far as what I love about the movement building space in the climate justice space. So there, it's like you have these movements within movements within movements, but at the heart of the climate justice movement building space, the absolute devout commitment to what we refer to now as the JEDI principles.
JEDI?
JEDI. So it resonates immediately, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah. Where do I sign up? Yeah.
I mean, exactly. So a lot of workspaces, are looking at DEI, for example. People hear that acronym, and in the climate justice space, as we were listening to directly impacted community members, and particularly community members of color and indigenous voices, they told white people like myself that when you use the letters DEI and you start with diversity, that is through the lens of a white dominant paradigm. It's white people wanting to diversify spaces. And then if you go from DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, that's not the right way to
organize that acronym.
Yeah, that's not going to happen, and it's not going to shift power dynamics, and it's not going to allow us to give up any power or to be humble and recognize our failings. And so JEDI was born out of youth-led communities of color, or thinking about, we want this stuff, but we have to figure out a different way to talk about it. And so justice, we have to start with justice. That's J. If you are focused on justice as your primary goal, then equity will begin to emerge, because that's the foundational value set framework of how you're going to get to justice. If you're doing justice and equity is beginning to reveal itself and how that looks, then diversity inherently becomes a strong value, and you've then gotten to the point of inclusivity.
That's cool. Yeah.
So that's what we try to do. On our website, we have a JEDI statement that is one of the strongest statements. I've had the blessing to work with a group of people to write. Anybody knows a mission statement is like the most painful thing to do. And a JEDI statement, I would beg, is even harder. But I'm very proud of our JEDI statement that we share with Interfaith Power and Light nationally. We actually went further in the Southeast through the Southeast Faith Leaders Network because we saw some things were missing that we wanted to make sure. And that is our conscience in practice. And we have to now come up with evaluation of where we're at in that. And so that's all very institutional in some ways, but I also do that personally. And so how could the local church think about maybe the development of a JEDI statement or adopt an existing JEDI statement? You don't have to, people already worked really hard on the words.
Yeah. Sounds.
I'll send you my JEDI statement.
I'd love that, yeah.
But I think it would be really interesting to do a reflection on how we practice that then, day to day. And where are we unable?
Sure.
What are the challenges?
Where are we hindered from that? What barriers are in place?
And then maybe that will drive
systems
some mission work, because if we can't get over that, if this is what we want to achieve, what are all the barriers to that? And that's where I feel like I've found in my work with regards to particularly holding the United States government accountable for holding corporations accountable for, and really giving voice to the people is what I really want to do. Another side, if I may, we are hopefully going to receive some funding to do a really interesting project in partnership with Duke University. Has a brand new heat innovation hub led by Dr. Ashley Ward. She's amazing. She ran for Congress. You might know her name through that, but she is at Duke University, leader of the Heat Innovation Hub, and is very interested in figuring out a way that Duke Energy could possibly take out some sort of insurance policy on low-income customers so that people that can't afford to pay their air conditioning bill when the heat rises to a point that it just gets too economically expensive to keep it running 24 hours a day, that somehow the company could be covered so that they wouldn't have to do any shut-offs for their low-income customers during this time of a changing climate.
Wow.
So those are examples of, and we're going to be a part of that because we're going to model this in churches in the Sandhills of North Carolina.
Oh, that's cool.
Where this is already an issue. So it's like thinking really philosophically, theologically about what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and then coming up with
holistically.
Yeah, coming up with the actual projects.
Solution. Yeah.
That's
cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. What are you doing? How is your life on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I came here with my friend, drove down 15501, as I said, I hadn't done that in a life. Gosh, in this day of age of working from home, I mean, there are weeks at a time that I do not leave our gravel road. And then, unfortunately, I counter off that unholistically with then I get on an airplane and I fly somewhere around the world, right? So I'm trying to figure out where that balance is and understanding that and what is it that I'm willing to sacrifice and thinking about it from a spiritual perspective in order to obtain or accomplish something. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And then it comes back maybe to the beginning of who I am as a person and really working and understanding that, because this is the one life I get, right? I'm not going to sacrifice the whole thing or maybe, I mean, other people don't get the choice. Right? So what kind of choices do I have? And I think a lot about choice all the time. So, yeah.
I wonder what questions you have for Susannah. Don't be shy. Dennis, yes?
Yes, to both. So does my faith inform my ability to live a hope-filled life? Absolutely. I'm very, 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 very grateful that I was brought up in a faith community. I'm born and raised Unitarian Universalist, and in our tradition, the 7 principles of the UU living tradition are my touchstones. They're what I walk through every day, and when I feel like I need help, that's what I go to every single time. And how blessed am I, or you, and it was a choice to actually have my entire professional career be in the sphere of leading with faith. I feel for everyone who has to go into the secular world every day and go through the mechanisms and then have faith be something that they have as on the side. I don't think that that's true. That's one of my big missions, is to make sure that we're always leading with love and the tenets of our faith, and then the rest of this is something that we're attempting to navigate through that lens. But it's hard. I mean, society does not allow us to do that. And I think our big challenge, back to the fray of the middle, is that progressive people of faith need to absolutely stand tall and strong and lead with our faith, like more than ever, because that's all that's the only way we're gonna win.
Because of what we believe.
Yeah, because we're up against people of faith that are leading with toxic theology. So we got to flip that on its side. So that's first and foremost. And then what is hopeful is that I do see a lot of folks standing up against toxic theology. Scholars would talk about liberation theology, but not everybody's had enough, privilege to be able to sit around and read about that. But we're living in these times, and it is the youth that are just blowing my mind day. And I mean, talk about listening, stepping back. I've done a whole training on youth-empowered solutions, what it means to adultism. They call me an aging ally. I love that so much. And it's just, and it's really interesting, especially as someone who works at the North Carolina Council of Churches, that an increasing number of our constituents that were like really meeting and are, doing the work that they're called to do, are not necessarily going to church, which is why the local church and this new model of being together in spiritual community is so exciting. And I think that that's where young people need to be provided spaces and resources to organize themselves in community, and then be listened to and resourced.
Right.
Not just be like, oh, that's nice.
Not just at the table.
Yeah. And
but given voice.
But really making the meal. Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope that's
You stole my
helpful.
question, Dennis. Yeah. Thanks. Others.
Great. Resources for people who are interested in learning more. I am in the process of putting together a page on our website that's going to be truly a resource page. I mean, it's hard with websites and web pages and links and all the things. But to be able to tell that story in a way that gets you to where you want to go as fast as possible is something that I'm excited about. And there are different tools now. It is interesting. I'm very blessed. Most of the staff at the Council of Churches is at least 10, 15 plus years younger than I am. And they just know how to do this stuff that I don't know how to do. And so hopefully that'll be available sooner than later. But also, it's interesting because we're having this conversation, but I really would like to hear more about what you all, and you're in a leadership position, like what does your community need, and how do we create a platform where you can ask for that, and then people like me can provide that.
Sure.
Because I'm a connector. People ask me all the time, where do you go to church? And I'm like, I don't have time to go to church, right? I mean, I really don't. I'm in it all the time. But also, that would be, for me, who I am, that would be me giving my resourcing into one space.
Sure, when it needs to be broader.
Yeah, I just do. I like to be in a lot of different spaces. And then I can share what other communities are doing as resources. And I think that's been really interesting as well. So that's a terrible answer. But
Well, for someone who hypothetically wants to kind of take a first step, right, into conversations around climate justice, is there a particular book or podcast or I know that you're so deep in it that it may be hard to...
Good, podcast. You use the word podcast. So my favorite podcast...
Great. YouTube channel, I don't know.
It's actually...
TikTok.
It's my friends that have it. It's called Climate Justice Y'all. And
Climate Justice Y'all? Love it.
You can just find it anywhere a podcast is. And it's local community members telling their own stories. The People's Justice Council is helping to lead that. So I think that's really interesting. I think what's for me is that understanding. Are you familiar with the drawdown? Drawdown, is that something?
Yes, I am.
So drawdown, I think, is probably the most comprehensive, big picture. What of these many, many, many areas around climate justice am I most passionate about? Is food justice my thing? Am I interested more in, like I've talked about the rights of nature? Like, am I less interested in about people, and I'm really actually interested in birds or water or whatever it is? And Drawdown, I think, is the best resource for that. And Drawdown originally was a book, and there's an entire website now, and they are also doing a lot of policy. So if you happen to be interested in policy, they'll take you down, into the policy. But there just isn't anything in our lives at any moment that climate doesn't connect to. So it's about identifying what your passion is.
Yeah, where your particular emphasis.
Don't try to do something you're not interested in. Is the biggest thing for me, because you're not going to love it.
Yeah.
And I think
a lot of slices of the pie.
For too long, energy, like literally the theory, like when we hear fossil fuels, we think about energy a lot of times, and we don't think about our food systems. And fossil fuels is wrapped up in all of that. But I think we've done real harm in the way that we've been communicating about how to get involved in the climate issue, because it seems very esoteric and other. And
yeah, which is why we don't know, right? Which is why we need those resources. Yeah, for sure.
Right.
For sure.
So if
and it seems so big and insurmountable.
Health to me has been in Dubai for the very first time. Again, this is like the United Nations negotiating space for the whole planet in relative to what we're all going to do as a human species. Last year was the very first year that they have different themed days. It was the first themed day on health. Prior to that, when we were in Egypt, it was the very first themed day on oceans. I mean, I was like, well, did no one have any interest in that?
Sure.
How does this stuff get overlooked? Which in many ways, back to what I said earlier, and for those of you that might not have heard that, talking about how COVID and the pandemic has completely transformed our global conversation around health, whether it's the built environment or the natural environment, whatever it is, that also gives me hope. I mean, the resiliency back into what it means to be resilient, to push to the brink of the edge, and then reflect back. Okay, what do we need to start doing differently? Where do we need to engage? Definitely talking about the global climate crisis as a global health crisis has been transformative for people to figure out how they're engaging in it. And the healthcare industrial complex is something that more and more people, I think, as things have gotten, it's just remarkable about, again, back to in communities of faith. I also often say, and I love that there's a huge green burial movement taking place right now, because those end of life conversations can absolutely transition how people interact while they're alive. And I hope that, I think the funeral industrial complex, to be quite honest, has really, the fact that many of us live our whole life and we're never actually around a dead person is a massive problem. And so the climate crisis is like existential, as is death, right? What are we really talking about here? So this is like a great entry point. I would say that maybe that's my first resource. If anybody asks me, how can I get involved in this? Think about what you're going to do when you die.
Sure.
and how that's going to look, and where do you want that to happen? Where do you don't want that to happen? And I've gone through that with both my parents and lots of friends. It's like, you don't want to be thinking about that stuff in that moment. And that's a perfect model for thinking about the climate crisis.
Time for one more.
We have to end on a hope-filled moment. So what was the greatest thing that I see when I go into these global spaces is that there is all this music, right? So music and music healing. And recently, my husband and I got back out. We have a copy of the Live Aid book from 1985. And has anybody seen the recent documentary, The Best Night in Pop? Have you seen it yet? Oh, it's the making of the We Are the World song. And it is, if you're going to watch one thing, okay, I know we're going to have the Oscars tonight, but maybe it'll win something. I can't imagine that it won't win something. It is incredible that they were able to film this. I don't want to give a thing away about how they made that song, and then what that turned into with Live Aid. I would like to see something like that happen. I know on 777, do you remember the 777 World Concerts? You can look back when it was 2007, and they did concerts on all 7 continents. And they tried to bring together like the world around music, and I was really into it, but it didn't really do anything.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Expensive,
But
but I do believe that music heals, and healing people heal the planet, and so we have such a rich cultural relationship to music in this area, and so I'm hoping there's something called Music Declares Emergency, and even Billie Eilish has signed on to it. So if we can figure out how to mobilize, one of my favorite memes over the Super Bowl period of time was, I wish Taylor Swift was in love with a climate scientist. Right? So how do we, this kind of goes back to like just mapping progressive people, right? I don't know how progressive Taylor Swift is, but like in general, music. So Party with a Purpose. We know that U2, I think one of the reasons that we're so both beloved, with them and the music is it's
more than the music.
It's more than music. Yeah. It's spiritual affirmation, it's prayer, it's inspiration. So I'm seeing a lot of that take place right now. And, an organization that you might be interested, the Hip Hop Caucus, great organization. They're basing it in music, arts. I think the music and arts, I think the energy that's happening here at the plant is just incredible. Yes. And that's, it's just absolutely beautiful.
So grateful, Susannah, for you being here tonight. Can we offer one round of applause? Thank you. You'll stick around for a little bit if people have questions. Yeah. And on behalf of the local church, who meets every Sunday at 10 a.m. at Woods Charter School, we are grateful for your presence here tonight. Thanks, friends.
Thank you.